Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. David, I just unmuted your phone as well. Welcome everyone. My name is Cass Hardy. I work for the Biological Resource Division in the Natural Resource Directorate for the National Park Service. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a part of an ongoing webinar series as a part of the Scaling Up initiative of the National Park Service, and our team focuses on land and seascape conservation initiatives. And our webinar series, the intention here is to expose useful tools or existing initiatives that are doing good work with the hope that we enable other park units to do the same. And so I've plugged a couple of links, as some of you know, into the chat box that'll take you to either the internal, if you're a part of the Department of Interior, you can access an internal website that we call our Scaling Up Toolbox. You can see upcoming webinars as well as all of our recordings. And then I also plugged a second link into where you can access all of those webinars on the Network for Landscape Conservation, which is an interagency partnership focused on landscape initiatives. So today we're fortunate enough to have David Szymanski, the Superintendent of Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, as well as Beth Pratt-Bergstrom from the National Wildlife Federation to talk to us about some of the great work that they're doing with an LA wildlife crossing. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. After their presentation, we will have a chance for questions and answers. Throughout the presentation, feel free to plug your questions into the chat box and we can get to those at the end. So thanks again, David and Beth, for joining us today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cass. Hi, this is David, and I'm happy to be here with Beth Pratt. We're in the same office. She's one of our dearest and most effective partners in conservation, and it's a pleasure to be able to do this webinar together. I'd like to thank Cass Hardy and the Natural Resources Division for inviting us, so thanks, Cass. Today, as we're talking about wildlife conservation in Los Angeles, I'm going to go ahead and present the park's perspective on this effort. One of the key points of this conservation webinar is that we really depend upon our partners to take conservation action. So after I go ahead and do that part of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Beth. And Beth is going to talk about the campaign that has made conservation action possible based on the science performed by the National Park Service. Okay. Oops, I have to, let's see, there we go. Greater Los Angeles contains 18.7 million people. For reference, that's almost 6% of the US population. Los Angeles is one of the world's mega cities. In fact, it's ranked 19th in the world. So when people think of Los Angeles, I think they think of film, the film industry. They definitely think about traffic. But there's another Los Angeles where the pavement ends. It's a Los Angeles of deep canyons, chaparral-covered hillsides, where you can still see the night sky. In this landscape, you can still find one of North America's largest predator, the mountain lion, or puma, or catamount. This animal goes by quite a few different names. Over the past 15 years, the National Park Service has studied more than 60 of these animals, and we've learned many things, but this lesson is perhaps the most important one. Los Angeles is surrounded by open space. Let me orient those of you on the phone to this map. In the bottom, you have the Santa Monica Mountains, which is part of the recreation area that managed by the National Park Service. That recreation area extends into the area labeled the Simi Hills. North of that, the Santa Monica Mountains and Simi Hills, you have the Santa Susana Mountains and the Los Padres National Forest. On the lower right-hand corner of the map, you have Los Angeles. And then let me see if you can see my arrow on the screen, which I think you can. This is the San Fernando Valley right here. Seems like a lot of open space, right? One of the problems, though, is that this area is isolated by roadways. that mountain lions are unlikely to cross. So there's a lot of color on this map. So let me pull out the key points quickly. Each particular color of dot indicates an individual animal. And from watching these animals for 15 years, what we've learned is they will come right up to the freeway, but they do not cross the road. This condition applies not only to mountain lions, but to other animals. Over the past 50 years, coyotes on either side of the 101 have become genetically separated. There's a really good reason that mountain lions do not cross the road. Each of the red stars on this map shows an area where we had, where a mountain lion was killed attempting to cross the road. Very few lions are successful if they choose that endeavor. So what do we do about it? Well, we asked our scientists, including those from the National Park Service, but our friends at the U.S. Geological Survey and from universities in California and throughout the nation. And we asked, what are the really important areas or corridors of movement so that if we're going to, that we should be addressing? And what they came up with were these green lines on the map. And what they also told us is this area right here in the circle, which is called Liberty Canyon, was the key to making the whole thing work. Well, science and working with partners had brought us to this point, understanding the problem and what needed to be done. We don't own the US 101. Creating or solving that problem was one that would require additional partners. And one of the partners who joined us very early in this endeavor was the National Wildlife Federation. And they've been instrumental in helping us to really achieve conservation goals for mountain lions and other species. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Beth Pratt.
Okay. Thank you, David. Let's see. Oh, there's the wildlife crossing. So thanks everybody. It's nice to see people or at least see your names from across the country. We are just the National Wildlife Federation, so proud to be involved, and I'll tell you the story in a minute on how we did, but this very much is, as David said, a partnership endeavor. This is will be the largest wildlife crossing in the world once built. A lot of hands in this, both before we got involved, but you know, to preserve the land. Obviously, the road was built by Caltrans, so it's really exciting because this really is a great example of partnership in action. But I think the partner we work the closest with is the National Park Service, and they're also the funnest. For those of you who don't know, most of my career has been spent in parks. I've worked in Yosemite and Yellowstone. I actually make my home near Yosemite, although I'm down here part-time. And we work very closely on the Save LA Cougars campaign with the National Park Service. You see us here with various staff members, including David on my right, probably your left. And to really what we're doing is obviously the National Park Service has done this incredible research, which I learned about in 2012 after reading the story of P22, which I'll tell you about. And what we're here to do is really help turn that research into conservation action. And we're doing so in sort of a unique way that I know is not your typical way you approach a conservation campaign, but as those of you who signed in know, it's working, and it's working really well. And I really appreciate David and Jeff and Seth and Kate and others who I know at first when I started running around with a mountain lion cutout and putting bow ties on it, were probably pretty skeptical, but I think have since drunk the Kool-Aid, so I really appreciate that. But we have approached this, and indeed, I think part of what's interesting is this campaign, or these mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area is different than a Yosemite or a Yellowstone. It is in the largest metropolitan area in the world. It's next to a city that is known for celebrity, and we've used that really effectively on how to approach this campaign. We also are lucky enough that although I love smaller animals or insects or salamanders, which are going to benefit from this crossing. We're also lucky that the star of the show here are these beautifully magnificent cats, and as we know from Facebook, everybody loves cats, and we have used them as celebrities. You know, P22 is the first cat you see there, who is sort of the Leo, the nice guy. P45 is sort of cast as the bad boy, and then they're fighting over, you know, P23, who's the femme fatale, or the conflicted cat, who often mates with her relatives. So, but we've used this in a very purposeful way. It's not just all fun and games and celebrity. As we know, celebrity can be used for good. And I think what we're finding, and it's not just with, you know, P22 and his relatives. I just finished a book about how these stories about animals can really be effective in changing minds. As we know, we need the science. We wouldn't even know there was a need for the crossing without the science. We wouldn't know that these cats are genetically collapsing without the science. But I think what you really have to do to get the general public involved is combine it with this storytelling. That's what's going to get people involved. This crossing that we're trying to build, this area, you know, they knew something had to be done for a long time, and they didn't know specifically to be a crossing, but they knew there were some issues. What we're seeing is it's really gaining traction, not, you know, really because of P22's story and how the public is perceiving it. And that's due to both you know, the Park Service does an excellent job at getting out the stories of these mountain lions, and then I'm able to take it a step further and be a little more goofy about it. For those of you on the line, though, that may not know the story of P22, and I don't know how you missed it, you know, he's very famous. This is P22. This video to me is really compelling because usually when you see mountain lions, they are in these pristine settings, you know, just all nature. And what you're seeing in the background there is the second largest city in the country. Not usually a backdrop when you see mountain lions. But his story is what really is compelling as well. We don't have any baby photos of P22 because we weren't, the Park Service was not studying him when he was a kitten, but this is probably what he looked like, pretty cute. Again, we're just so blessed. You know, when Kate and the Park Service releases new kitten photo, we always get a lot of attention on the campaign. But mountain lions, some of you may know when they reach teenage years, about this age, again, this isn't P22, but probably what he looked like as he was approaching teenagehood, they have to disperse. Their mother kicks them out of the house, and they have to disperse long territories. Male mountain lion territories are on average about 200 square miles. So P22 had to move not just to the house next door, but, you know, a 200 square miles away. And when you're living in the most densely populated metropolitan area in the country, that's not easy. So this is what he had to do. He had to cross the 405, walk through towns like Beverly Hills and Bel Air, and then cross the 101, and then walk through all those neighborhoods to get to Griffith Park. I don't know how many of you have been to LA. I'm terrified driving on the 405 and the 101, so that this cat made it is pretty remarkable in itself. This map really shows the urban living, so you can see why people really resonate with this cat story. It's amazing. He's living in the smallest known home range ever recorded for a mountain lion, 8 square miles. And again, their usual home range is 200, but also surrounded by urbanization. And as we know, these cats are usually ghost cats. They avoid people. And indeed, what the National Park Service study is finding is even within these urban areas, they still avoid people. P22, he does make his rare celebrity appearances, but in a park that's visited by 10 million people a year, people hardly see him. These are the first photos. We probably wouldn't even know he's there, or wouldn't have known he was there for a long time if it wasn't for remote cameras. The Griffith Park connectivity study, they were not looking for mountain lions. They were looking for just what wildlife was using the park, and up pops a mountain lion. Miguel Ordiana, one of the scientists working on it, along with Erin Boydstein and Dan Cooper and others, were very surprised to see a mountain lion come as a result of their study. So they contacted the National Park Service, who had this occurring mountain lion study since 2002, and that's Jeff Sikich there, putting P22's first collar on him because he is a Hollywood cat, so of course he needs some bling. And so that's why we know a lot about him. And we could do a whole presentation on the Park Service findings, but that's for another day. But he became famous. Steve Winter took this very famous photo of P-22. It took him 14 months to get it with the help of the National Park Service, because these were remote cameras figuring out where he roamed and how could we get the Hollywood sign in the background. And this is when P-22's, celebrity really made it big once this was published, and he became the most famous mountain lion in the world. And he does get media attention everywhere. But this is actually the next photo, my favorite photo of him, for somewhat sad reasons, because although he's become a celebrity, he's way more Greta Garbo than Kim Kardashian. He likes, to be alone. He also is lonely, and as much as a cougar can be lonely, will probably never have, although I don't like to never say never with wildlife. A female probably won't reach him. And he's done something they've never seen a mountain lion do before, which is stay put. So this is why we think, his story is really resonating. Here's sort of the last holdout of his kind in Griffith Park, still searching. He still, according to some of the footage, is still making calls, even after 5 years, seeing if some other mountain lion is out there. So people around the world have really resonated with his story. But his story is also doing something good for his mountain lion relatives, although he doesn't know it. This is the problem here. This is the problem he's facing. The reason he probably hasn't left is he doesn't want to have to cross those freeways again. And these cats are having to do it. These freeways are defining their territories. And what usually happens, like this is P32, a beautiful cat that all of us here were following once he entered the National Park Service study. He did what a good mountain lion should do, and indeed crossed some of the same roads P22 did, only to get killed on the 5. And that's the reality of what happens to these cats here. And I think, again, why people are just so interested in saving them. They get mangled by cars in these freeways just trying to survive. So that's how the National Wildlife Federation got involved. Jeff Sikich, who's pictured here, one of the biologists, and Seth Riley, who's not pictured here, is one of the others. But I had learned about the story of P-22 in 2012, and actually myself was pretty incredulous, having worked in Yosemite and Yellowstone, just simply did not believe a mountain lion could be living in LA. But Jeff was gracious enough to take me out for the day, show me Griffith Park, which I had never been to, but also tell me about this larger challenge that P-22 really symbolized. And at the end of the day, I turned to Jeff and said, what can we do through the National Wildlife Federation to help? And he literally said, well, there's this little wildlife crossing we need built. So, and here it is. Here is what we will have built as a result of our partnership and partnership with the other players in the project. This wildlife crossing over the 101, reconnecting an ecosystem for all wildlife. And, as the Park Service researchers will tell you, the same genetic isolation that's happening with mountain lions is happening with salamanders and birds. So this is going to help not just the mountain lions, although they're the easier sell. So I guess the last section is how are we doing this, right? I mean, this is not a cheap project. This is $60 million that we have to raise to do it. And we're at a really exciting time. If we had more time, I'd give more of an update. But this really started as an idea a few years ago. We had zero funding. We're at 3.5 and counting million in funding, and the feasibility study was done with some funding from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. The environmental documents, probably the most boring but vital phase, is pretty much about to be released, and we're going to go into final design and construction. And if we stay on track with this campaign, again, this will be built in 2022. So what we've done, and this is a slide that Jeff and Seth usually use to describe genetics, and I joke that what I do is take this very scientific concept, and I use the slide or the photo to the right of it, which is translated into something the public can really get passionate about. Not that genetics isn't something we can get passionate about, but most people like kittens better. So we've translated into this celebrity campaign where P-22 and his relatives are really the voice. We use the first person. We anthropomorphize, we do. But we balance a nice line where we anthropomorphize, but we use scientific, so that even when we talk about cougars dating, we talk about that, yes, they don't fall in love. They actually are one-night stands for the most part. And people really respond to this. And more than that, the press really responds to this. As the Park Service knows, and I know, anytime these cats do something, we get a call from the major outlets of the world. This is the site of the crossing that we're standing looking at the 101, and where this is going to be built. We had a rally. We started this off with public engagement and really building a grassroots movement, which is a little different than you'll do in a lot of capital campaigns. You'll sort of do it behind the scenes until you get closer to the big total. But what we've been told by some of our biggest funders to date is that one of the reasons they wrote $1 million check was because they were astounded by the grassroots behind this, that this was a project supported by a lot of people. And that's been the result of this campaign. And David, what did you call your media, the wildlife industrial media complex, I think is what?
That might have been a Kate Kirkendall thing,
yeah.
But yes.
So it's really fueled by these stories are getting out, that people are getting engaged. As we said, when P22 got trapped under a home, Time magazine covered it. I mean, people were following this all over the world. I don't know too many other cougars that have been interviewed on Marketplace. The study and the cats were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Again, not usually a paper you would think would get behind environmental causes. The LA Times has a cougar beat. If you can point to me any other major newspaper of the world that does a front page spread and does regular stories on mountain lions, it's exceptional. The New Yorker did a feature article on the lions of Los Angeles. We've done a lot of, obviously there's the press, but then we also have a lot of other ways people can connect. P22 has his own Facebook page, and he regularly talks to people in his voice. And I know that Jeff and Seth check in to make sure I'm not going too far off the rails. And again, we've been able to achieve this really nice balance so that people are learning about proper cougar biology while at the same time having some fun. If you ever wondered what P22's poop looks like, that's it. And those P22 footprints, we actually made casts that we sell in our store. So we do a lot of sales of sort of P22 products as well. Also, the sort of looking for love has really resonated. If you notice, like the Wall Street Journal article, but a lot of the press does focus on these lonely cougars of Los Angeles. And what you're seeing is penetration too. This writer who did this P22 and 23 sort of a matchmaking story, she usually writes about fashion. So the Cougars of Los Angeles have also been in Teen Vogue. So what I love is these are again showing up in outlets that you usually wouldn't expect. We definitely have used the celebrity angle since P22 is a celebrity himself, and this cutout, which started out with one of the National Park Service people made a big wooden heavy one that they were using at like the Science Fest and other science fairs. And I was like, hey, we need a portable one to start, bringing around the city. So that's worked out really well, and people really love having their photos. That's James Cameron, Rainn Wilson, who's done a PSA for us, Ed Begley, who moderated a panel for us at a screening of the movie about P22. But to me, what's more interesting than actually the celebrity cameos is that P22 has become a part of the Angelino experience. People love getting their photo taken with the cutout, and they're seeing mountain lions especially as native wildlife. They write letters to him, and they talk on his Facebook page. If you want to see a public engagement, just look at how people talk on the Facebook page. It's really fun. We put out one of the products we put out both for educational and for fundraising is the Cougars of LA trading cards. It's the first 50 cats that have been studied by the National Park Service since they started the study. We're already behind because new kittens just appeared. But again, we put these in the first person, but people are learning an awful lot about these cougars in their midst, which is fun. He has his own clothing line. You can get P22 t-shirts and sweatshirts, and there's even a P22 cycling club that you can buy, the P22 cycling kit. There is a documentary that we did not make, but that features the National Park Service, that features myself in the campaign, and Miguel, who worked on the original study that discovered the photo of him, that tells the story of P22 and the crossing that we've been attending screenings of, and to my surprise have been full houses. They just did a screening in Hollywood that the theater was packed at 400. We put together a virtual reality experience, which actually you'll be able to download probably at the end of this month, showing the need for the crossing and showing the traffic through the wildlife eyes. And then I authored a book that P22, of course, is the star of the show on, that has been really great for outreach as well. People read about the project, get excited, and then contact us. But I think the thing that's really worked with outreach, that is achieving some framework, is what we did last year, which was, and we're repeating this year, P22 Day and Urban Wildlife Week. One of the reasons we started this, I had this idea to retrace P22's route and that we needed sort of a day in his honor. But Caltrans, as I told you, they're just finishing up the environmental documents, and last year we're in the middle of it. And we didn't have anything exciting to report, and Kate wasn't pulling out enough kittens out of the study. So we decided to sort of bring some attention to the campaign by creating this week. And it's worked well. Follow us this year, October 15th through 22nd. We had the mayor and the city council of Los Angeles declare an official P22 day, forever known as October 22nd. We retraced the route, which we'll be doing again this year. His likely route, obviously, for most of it, we don't know exactly, but I'll tell you, once you cross that 405, there's not too many places he could go, and I'm surprised we made it. I can't believe we made it hiking, and I can't believe he made it, given some of the obstacles he had to cross. But this was a really great public outreach to do the hike. We worked very closely with the LA School District and other schools, and really tied the schools in, and have a whole series of weeks events. Again, anybody who's interested in this sort of outreach, I can send you materials if you're interested in sort of doing something like this. Here is the festival itself. We had about 2,000 people last year. We're expecting 5,000 this year. You know, just that the school kids are doing curriculum leading up to the festival and beyond on these mountain lions, designing crossings, making mountain lion vests, making posters for the campaign. It was really amazing to see. We donated some cutouts to the schools, so here's P22 and replications. So just a great sort of dynamic and framework around celebrating, but also learning about these animals and more. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with is, again, we're going to get this crossing built, and it's amazing to see. And it's because of P22. It's because his story is resonating. It's because the Park Service has the science and continues to do the science. It's because of our other partners as well. So you need all the pieces, but sure, you know, P22 showing up, you know, in living under the Hollywood sign really helped. But I do think you could replicate this by, you know, telling stories even about, you know, maybe less charismatic animals. So I think the model is really solid. But I do want to end with the crossing's one thing, but what is actually more rewarding to me, and I think, you know, all those involved in this project, is that this value system that's being really forged here. Most other places in the country, P22 probably would have been removed or even perhaps killed in 2012 when he showed up. But what you're really seeing is a continued people coming down and valuing the native wildlife. And I think he's really become the most extreme, in a positive way, example of that LA, long been known as sort of the environmental bad guy in the LA area, which, you know, the Santa Monica Mountains runs right into, are really coming down squarely on the side of, we want these cats here, even though we know they might be dangerous. And when P22 happened to allegedly, although I think the gig is up, it's probably him, munch on a koala bear in the LA Zoo, which is right in Griffith Park, and, you know, unfortunately picked one of the cutest animals in, you know, in the world to eat. He just thought it was a raccoon.
But he was the koala was 135 in people years. So
yeah, so yeah, it was, you know, and it was crawling on the ground, right? So, but what you saw, which, you know, I think a lot of us were sweating it when that first came out, was that no, you know, 80 to 90% of the people writing into the LA Times or online were saying it's not P22's fault. The LA Zoo came out and said our bad, our fence wasn't big enough. And then you had, you know, media from all over the country saying, wow, what's going on with LA? You know, they're okay with a dangerous predator being there. And that's what's coming across. You know, people are under no illusions here. They know P22 can be dangerous. He hasn't been. As we know, the attack of risk from mountain lion is really low. I mean, if you want to worry about death in LA, it's the 101 that'll probably take me out and a lot of others more than a mountain lion. But people know when I do school talks, these kids know they can be dangerous. In fact, we do safety when I do them. We do how to be safe in mountain lion territory. So it's not that we're creating this dynamic where people think they can go up and pet P22. They actually are just, I think, in really wanting this wildness in their midst. It's not everybody, but it's certainly the majority. So I think that this native wildlife dynamic that is being creative and strengthened, you know, it didn't start with P22, but it certainly strengthened with it, is really, to me, very encouraging. And the last thing I'm going to do, if this works, let's see. I want to play you this video from P22 Day that I think really shows this, but also shows, I think, the most important thing about this campaign is we're connecting young people to wildlife in ways that is fundamental. And that these kids connect to P22 on a very personal level, I think even more than the wildlife crossing is success. So I will end with this. There we go, it should work.
My letter starts with Dear P22, I know that you crossed the freeway without getting hurt. I think it was amazing that you crossed the freeway. Now you can back to the Santa Monica Mountain. Why did you cross the freeway? Why do you have a divisor on your neck? Do you like Griffith Park? Do you like being lonely? And do you have a family? It's good that the scientists are going to help you. I feel happy that you are in Griffith Park. It's a nice place to live in Griffith Park. Love, Andrea Garcia. My letter to P22 is, Dear P22, I know that you have been poisoned by rat poison. You should always try to watch your food, not always eat that thing. I don't think that the tracking device will hurt you. It will help you stay safe. I feel bad for you. I know how it feels to be lonely. Sad, I'm scared. I've been there before. I hope you have a mate to be happy and peace and love. P22. How did it feel like to be in Santa Monica Mountain? How about in Griffith Park? Did you have a mate in Santa Monica Mountain? How lonely do you feel? Love, Rogelio Tunas. Thank you.
So I will admit, when those kids read the letters, I burst into tears. I just thought it was one of the most moving things that they were relating to him. So anyway, that's our presentation. Thank you for listening. And now I guess we're opening up to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth and David. Excellent presentation. And as you said, Beth, so much more than, you know, just the wildlife crossing, albeit that's a huge part of it. You guys have really created a movement and raised awareness on such a deeper level. I'm going to go ahead and unmute all the lines. And while I'm doing that, if anyone has a question, you can feel free to plug it into the question box. We'll get started. Go ahead. Did someone want to go ahead and start us off with a question?
Let's see, I'm not the only one that has problems.
Okay, I think all lines should be open now. If you use the audio pin to dial in, that is. While we're waiting for the first question, Beth, will you just will you share one more time the sort of what funding level you're at and what's the funding level that you need to get to, just as a kind of a recap?
Yeah, so sure. We've been looking at this in buckets because it's the only sane way to look at it. But the first phase was making sure it could be done. So Caltrans had to do, and their partners, a feasibility study, which that started in 2013, 2014, and the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy funded that. So that was the first bucket. Second bucket is the phase we're just completing. So the environmental documents, which is probably the most important phase, the compliance. You do about 30% design and engineering. We were able to raise the 1.5 million that Caltrans needed to do that. They literally are releasing that very soon. And then the next goal is to get the funding done through the final design and engineering, so to get it to shovel ready. And we have a goal, it used to be December, but we're thinking June now because actually the environmental documents got delayed by some months too, of 10 million to get to that phase. We already have a few million in for that. So we are making good progress. And then once that is done, the last bucket, which we can do while they are finishing up the final design and engineering, is to raise the construction dollars, which will be an additional, probably until the final design is done, it's estimated, but probably an additional 40 to 50 million that we need to raise. Included in our $60 million total, though, and I always like to stress this, is to create an endowment for the National Park Service research of at least $1 million, because the crossing, if we build it, yet there's no research project, what's the point? So we want to make sure that that is tied, a sustainable part of the funding as well, that crossing, that research continues. So those are the buckets we're in. We're really excited because this environmental documents phase is a big deal. A lot of funders actually were saying, yeah, we want to get involved, but not until, some of these planning documents are done. So we're really celebrating here in the next month. This is a huge deal. Still have a long way to go, but this is a huge deal.
Great. And there are two other questions in the question box. I'll just toss them out there. And if someone has a question, feel free to speak up after those. First question is, so working with the current wildlife crossing, there must be future plans, as we saw the maps with what David had shared, to continue maybe building crossings across the 5 and other places. So is it, right now you're working on the 101 because it's closest to Santa Monica, and then in the future, are there plans to continue working on additional wildlife crossings?
That's a really good question. Not all the crossings are the same, and so there are other crossings that are slightly easier to get across, and where there are existing tunnels or other features where if we can put up fencing to prevent the animals from crossing at the place where they'll go over the top of the freeway, we may be able to have some success. The problem with Liberty Canyon, there's really no way across, but that is the area where animals seem to have chosen to come into the Santa Monica Mountains from outside, which is what needs to happen. So yes, and the thing is, we're not working on them in sequence. We're actually working at the same time. We've started working with Caltrans to look at fencing along the 118, which is the next roadway to the north of the Simi Hills, and sort of the next barrier. We were given a little bit of an urgent call. There was a female mountain lion, and 2 of her kittens were killed on that roadway within the last 6 to 9 months. So yeah, we're kind of working on it at the same time. That'll be a much less expensive solution, however.
Yeah, the 101, we get a lot of I get asked this question a lot too. The 101 is again, according to the research, it is the worst need. It is what is blocking and causing, for the most part, the other roads are too, but boy, this is the first one that needs to be addressed. And obviously the biggest. Not all of them are going to need $60 million crossings, right? So, and as David said, some of these we're working on in sequence. But yeah, we're, my perspective, yeah, I'm not just going to stop with, the Liberty Canyon, whatever the Park Service, or if it's out of Park Service area, whatever else is needed. I think the good news is there's like a statewide corridor group in California now. There's other crossings going in across the state, but the National Wildlife Federation is really looking at a regional approach too. When you look at like from Washington to all the way down to Southern California, there's actually not that many major roads that if you picked off all of them, like the major freeways, you could start looking at a continuous, wildlife friendly zone all the way from Washington to California. So that's the type of stuff that excites me. But there's no doubt, and it can be misleading because not as many animals get killed on the 101, but that's because they don't even try. Like if you haven't stood and looked across the 101, which I have, you don't try. It's 10 lanes of traffic that never slows. So, but yeah, we won't stop. And as I said, the other roads are already being looked at.
And one more question in the box, and then we'll open the lines back up again. Just with all of the education and sort of the communication campaign that you've created, Beth, with the National Wildlife Federation, are there other areas in the U.S. or around the world that are looking at Santa Monica Mountains and this whole campaign sort of as a best practice? And this specific question is asking about such as like South Florida with the Florida panther.
David might know if other Park Service units are. I do know, like the National Wildlife Federation, our Seattle office did an Urban Wildlife Week. Our Baltimore office is looking at doing one, and then our Michigan office, one of the leaders is flying out to check it out, along with a board member from Denver. So I think, at least in terms of like this public outreach from my organization, I do know a couple other groups who are doing cutouts for their animals, so I think it's being replicated. But David, I mean, other Park Service units or?
Yeah, I think one of the critical things to remember about what's happening in Southern California is it's driven by groups of people in Southern California. So people reacted. So we started working with the media to get stories out about research, and then the public got involved, and it showed that they were rather at that point in time, which was 2002, 2003, when we collared P1, we were unsure whether people would see that as a safety risk, that, oh my Lord, there are mountain lions around here. Prior to that time, there were sightings, but no one really had any hadn't really confirmed that their existence. People reacted very positively, and it's something that they really want in their backyard. And so the campaign has kind of grown up, or the education activities have grown up with the people and groups that we work with in Southern California. My feeling is a different approach would work in different places based on really what their goals are and what people would like. I think the common things that what Beth illustrates is there's kind of we have the hard news stories and the hard science for people that want that. We also, for folks that want to be able to get involved and learn more, for people that want to celebrate and think about lions in a different way, we have that too. So it's there are a lot of different ways to, I guess, make it personal for people, and that's maybe the only thing that might be transferable.
Yeah, I think making it personal, and again, you can't do one without the other. If we didn't have the science backing this, it would just be an empty, silly educational or fun campaign. But I do think if there's any universality to this, what we find is that people love wildlife. Like, I can't say, and I do think, I was joking with somebody, my next campaign will be to make the tick likable, right? I don't know how much success we'll have, but I do think the replicability, and David's right. I mean, both the Park Service has been working on sort of building the base for years, but also California has since 1990 has shown a value towards mountain lion. It's Prop 117 in 1990 was voted on by ballot measure to protect the mountain lion as a specially protected mammal. So we have this sort of base already to start with. So that's why I think reading your room or reading your audience, like you'll have to, look at what in your region people respond to positively. You know, mountain lion might not be the most appropriate in your region, but there is that wildlife that I think most people positively identify with. And it's not that we don't have our challenges here. There are people who obviously do not want mountain lions on the landscape here, and we also have to work on, you know, making sure we address that in the campaign too. But I do think this fundamental connection to wildlife is what's replicable. But you do have to like start from scratch. And again, we had the good base of the Park Service, we had the good base of the state of California that worked on this. But that is what's, you know, replicable everywhere. Just find that animal and start work.
Great. Other questions from participants? Okay, hearing none, we will go ahead and close out our webinar for today. Once again, thank you so much, Beth and David, for joining us today. A lot of positive comments in the question box, just saying thank you so much for sharing as much as you did, and wishing you guys luck on the continued success of the project. This webinar is recorded, so we'll be posting it on our internal toolkit as well as on the Network for Landscape Conservation. So if you know of someone who missed it, feel free to send them that way. And as far as scaling up is concerned, our next webinar is September 20th, and we'll feature land fire. So if you want to join us for that, mark your calendars, and we'll be posting about that soon. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.